We have studied in the previous module the concept of Mundell-Fleming model, which is also known as IS-LM-BP model under the fixed exchange rate system. In this module, we will begin our discussion of Mundell-Fleming model under flexible exchange rate. In this module, we will discuss the model to examine how internal and external balance can be reached simultaneously with monetary policy under a freely flexible exchange rate system.
After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the Mundell-Fleming model under the flexible exchange rate system, analyze that monetary policy is effective under the flexible exchange rate, study the policy mix and the role of monetary and fiscal policy to achieve equilibrium. We will begin our discussion with Mundell-Fleming model under flexible exchange rate system. In a system of flexible exchange rate, the central bank allows the exchange rate to be determined by the market forces alone. Let us analyze the case of Mundell-Fleming model with flexible exchange rate and imperfect capital mobility. The three markets in figure are in equilibrium at point E with the situation of external balance and unemployment. Let's take the effects of monetary policy with the initial equilibrium at point E, where I is the interest rate and Y is the income level. Suppose the monetary authority follows an expansionary monetary policy which shifts LM curve to the right to LM dash and intersects E2. This leads to short-run BOP deficit because point E2 is below and to the right of BP curve. With the fall in the interest rate to I dash, there is a capital outflow. This leads to increase in the demand for foreign currency and the country's exchange rate depreciates. This increases the exports and decreases imports. This results in IS curve to shift to right to IS dash. BOP situation also improves, which resulted in the shift of BP curve to BP dash. The new equilibrium is established at E star, where the curve IS dash is equals to LM dash is equals to BP dash curves, and both external balance and internal balance are attained at a higher OY dash income level than OY. Thus, monetary policy is effective under the flexible exchange rate. Now consider the situation with expansionary fiscal policy in the figure. The equilibrium point is E, where the three markets are in equilibrium. With an increase in government expenditure or cut in taxes, the IS curve will shift to IS dash, which cuts LM curve at E3. This raises the interest rate to I double dash. There is capital inflow, which results in currency appreciation. This in turn raises imports and reduces exports and leads to depreciation of currency. And IS dash is shifted back to IS curve. So again the equilibrium point E is attained. Thus, fiscal policy is ineffective under the flexible exchange rate. With expansionary monetary policy, the rate of the interest is lowered, which increases the capital outflow and thereby bringing the deficit in the balance of payments. As shown in figure, the equilibrium is at point E, where IS, LM and BP intersect. An expansionary monetary policy shifts the LM curve to the right to LM dash curve. The LM dash intersects the IS curve at E dash, which lowers the interest rate to I dash and raises the income to OY1. These lead to capital outflows and the consequent deficit in the balance of payment and the depreciation of exchange rate. Depreciation increases the demand for domestic goods in the foreign country, thereby increasing the output and income. This moves the economy upward along the LM' curve till it reaches point E double dash, where income rises to OY2 and the interest rate rises to the old level I. Equilibrium in the balance of payment is restored at E double dash, where the increase in imports through the rise in income is offset by surplus in trade balance due to depreciation. Now take an expansionary fiscal policy which shifts the IS curve to IS dash in the figure. The economy is in equilibrium at E dash, where the IS dash crosses the LM curve with I dash interest rate and OY dash income level. Since point E dash is above the BP line, there is surplus in the balance of payment. This surplus leads to appreciation of the exchange rate, which in turn reduces the demand for domestic output. This process of appreciation will continue so long as the domestic interest rate is above the world rate and the capital inflows continue. Appreciation will continue to reduce the demand for goods and offset the expansionary effect of fiscal policy till the IS dash curve shifts back to the IS curve and the equilibrium is re-established at point E, where the interest rate and the income are back to the original levels. Thus, under flexible exchange rate and perfect capital mobility, fiscal policy is completely ineffective in influencing the level of national income.
Next, we will discuss the policy mix and price changes. Robert Mundell has argued that A. Assigning monetary policy for external balance and fiscal policy for internal balance would be an appropriate assignment. B. Fiscal policy for external balance and monetary policy for internal balance would be an inappropriate assignment. In order to fully understand the policy mix, we will study the internal balance schedule and the external balance schedule.
Moving on to the internal balance schedule YY is also called the internal equilibrium line. It is positively sloped and shown in the figure. The vertical axis measures the interest rate, which is an instrument of monetary policy, and the horizontal axis measures the government expenditure, which is an instrument of fiscal policy. If we are at any point on the YY line, we are assured of the full employment and the price stability, that is, with zero rate of inflation and the unemployment. As seen in the figure, point A is a combination of low interest rate and low government expenditure. Low interest rate would result in high levels of investment, income and employment, and combined with low level of government expenditure, there would be full employment with no inflation. If at point A, if the government expenditure would be high, it will only lead to inflation. Point A on YY line is of full employment with zero inflation. Similarly, another point D on YY line, we have a combination high interest rate and high level of government expenditure. Here the high level of rate of interest would cause low investment, income and employment, and therefore high level of government expenditure is required to achieve full employment with price stability. So, whether we are at point A with low rate of interest combined with low government expenditure, or at point D with high level of rate of interest and the government expenditure, there must be internal equilibrium along the YY line. To the left of YY, at a point such as B, there is unemployment and the deflationary gap, because at point B, either the rate of interest is too high, causing investment to be low, or the government expenditure is too less to ensure full employment in the economy. At point B, there is an unemployment which will be corrected by reducing the rate of interest or by increasing government expenditure. So, if we are at point D, we need to apply either an expansionary monetary policy or expansionary fiscal policy to restore the internal equilibrium. If, however, we are to the right of YY line at point such as E, we have inflation in the country, because at point E, there is excessive government expenditure causing inflation. This inflation can be eliminated either by the contractionary monetary policy or by contractionary fiscal policy. Thus, to the right of and below the YY line, there is inflation, and to the left of and above, there is unemployment. Next, we will discuss the external balance schedule. In the figure, the external balance schedule is BB line, which is also referred to as external equilibrium line. BB schedule is also positively sloped, and at any point on the BB schedule, there is BOP equilibrium with no overall deficits or surpluses. At any point such as G on the BB schedule, there is a combination of low rate of interest and the low government expenditure. Low rate of interest creates capital outflows, which must be offset by low level of government expenditure, which in turn guarantees low level of income and the imports. Similarly, at point K on the BB schedule, higher level of rate of interest is combined with high level of government expenditure to ensure BOP equilibrium. Here, the level of government expenditure creates high level of incomes and imports, which must be offset by a high level of rate of interest to create capital inflows. The current account deficits are offset by capital account surpluses to yield an overall BOP equilibrium at point like K on the BB line. If we are to the left of BB schedule at a point such as H, we have an overall BOP surplus, and this surplus can be eliminated either with the help of an expansionary monetary policy, that is, moving from point H to G, or by expansionary fiscal policy, that is, by moving from point H to I, and thus restoring the BOP equilibrium. Monetary policy will reduce the capital account surplus, whereas fiscal policy would reduce the current account surplus. Similarly, if we are to the right of BB schedule, such as I, we have an overall BOP deficit. So, contractionary fiscal or monetary policy is needed to get rid of this deficit. Thus, to the right and below the BB line, there is an external deficit, and to the left of and above, there is an external surplus. The internal and external balance schedule is now collectively shown in the following figure. YY and BB lines divide the diagram into 4 zones of disequilibrium. The two lines intersect at point E, which is a situation of internal as well as external balance equilibrium, with a combination of interest rate and government expenditure at point E, the economy achieves full employment with price stability and an overall BOP equilibrium. Zone 1. Zone 1 represents a case of unemployment surplus because if we are at any point in this zone, as shown in the figure, we are left to both YY line and BB line. An expansionary monetary and fiscal policy will help the economy in returning to point E. Zone 2. We are on the right side of YY and BB line in this zone, so it depicts the situation of inflation deficit combination. The rule is to adopt the contractionary monetary and fiscal policy. They will restore the economy to a complete balance and return it to the full equilibrium point at E. The problem of assignment arises only in the case of disequilibrium that lie between YY and BB lines on either side of point E, which is discussed in the following zones. Zone 3. Zone 3 is a case of unemployment deficit because if we are at any point on this zone, we are to the left of YY line, which indicates unemployment, but at the same time we will be to the right of BB line, which represents external deficit. Zone 4. Zone 4 represents a case of inflation surplus at any point in that zone as the economy is to the right of YY, which indicates inflation, but to the left of BB line, which signifies external balances. The situation in Zone 3 and Zone 4 require a careful assignment of appropriate policy instrument to achieve the two balances. Both the lines YY and BB have the positive slope, but YY line is steeper than BB line. This happens when short-term international capital flows are more responsive to the international interest differentials.
This can be explained as follows. Expansionary policy raises national income and increases the transaction demand for money in the nation. If monetary authorities increase the money supply sufficiently to satisfy the increased demand, the interest rate will remain unchanged. So, under these circumstances, fiscal policy affects the level of national income but not the interest rate. On the other hand, monetary policy operates by changing the money supply and the nation's interest rate. The change in the nation's interest rate affects not only the level of investment and national income but also international capital flows. As a result, monetary policy is more effective than fiscal policy in achieving external balance, and so the BB line is more flatter than the YY line. The monetary policy should be assigned to achieve external balance and fiscal policy to achieve internal balance. If the nation did the opposite, it would move farther and farther away from internal and external balance.
As shown in the figure at point C, indicating unemployment and a deficit represented by Zone 3, the nation used a contractionary fiscal policy to eliminate the external deficit and move to point C dash on BB line. If it used an easy monetary policy to eliminate unemployment, it could have moved to point C double dash on the YY line, and so the nation moved farther and farther away from point E. On the other hand, if nation appropriately used an expansionary fiscal policy to reach point C1 on YY line and then used a tight monetary policy to reach point C2 on the BB line, the nation would have been closer to point E. So, the nation could similarly reach the equilibrium point E from any other point of internal and external balance by the appropriate combination of fiscal and monetary policies. The flatter is the BB curve in relation to YY line, as the international capital movements are more sensitive to the interest rate changes than the private domestic investment. On the other hand, if short-term capital flows did not respond to interest differentials, the BB line would have the same slope as the YY line. In that case, zone 3 and zone 4 would completely disappear and would be left with zone 1 and zone 2.
Let us now summarize what we have learnt in this module. In this module, with flexible exchange rate, the nation could reach external and internal balance by using only monetary and fiscal policy. Using monetary policy will have greater effect on interest rate. With perfectly elastic international capital flows and flexible exchange rates, the monetary policy is effective while fiscal policy is completely ineffective. In the other section, the appropriate assignment of the two instruments, monetary policy and fiscal policy, is assigned to achieve the two objectives of internal and external balance. This policy mix is, however, relevant only in the short run, whereas in the long run, external balance may require a change in the exchange rate.